it will be an official event. Okay, we're live. Hey, everybody, welcome back to the 1455 interview. I'm Sean Murphy, the executive director of 1455. I usually do these interviews spaced out for a variety of reasons. Today, we are going back to back with our second tag team husband-wife combination. We had Karen Bender and Robert Siegel last year, and today, partners in crime on many levels. Tara Laskowski, who I just talked to, and her husband, Art Taylor. You may notice that we are intentionally wearing the same shirt because Tara pointed out that in a previous interview, she saw this shirt. I'll let Art talk about it too, but the long story short is this is actual stand in the Ferry Building in San Francisco that, among other things of charcuterie, they let you sample the salted meat, and they literally cut it and serve it to you like a snow cone, which for me was this mind-boggling experience. So I love rocking this shirt. But writers, George Mason, we've got a lot of symmetry here today, which I'm delighted about. But let me introduce our guest. I've been looking forward to this because those of you that probably already know him, I know Art because his reputation precedes him, and you'll see why when I read his interview, which I actually had to condense because it was even longer. Art is the author of the story collection, The Boy Detective, and The Summer of '74 and Other Tales of Suspense, and the novel and stories On the Road with Dell and Louise, which was the winner of the Agatha Award for Best First Novel. He also won the 2019 Edgar Award for Best Short Story for English 398 Fiction Workshop, which was originally published in Ellery Queen's Mystery Magazine. He's won 3 additional Agatha Awards, an Anthony Award, 4 Macavity Awards, and 3 consecutive Derringer Awards for his short fiction. So we love and hate and envy him in equal measure. Remarkable. He is Associate Professor of English at my alma mater, George Mason University, and he's contributed frequently to the Washington Post, the Washington Independent Review of Books, and Mystery Scene Magazine. And again, that's, believe it or not, the short version. So Art, welcome and props. Thank you for being here.
Thanks so much, and thanks for coordinating these T-shirts. As you mentioned, this is, in San Francisco, it was the first BoucherCon, which is a world mystery convention that my wife and I went to, and it was in San Francisco, our first trip to San Francisco. We made a big week out of it, but one of the highlights of our touristing around was going to the Ferry Building. Like you said, this place, and I loved it so much, I was like, I have to get this T-shirt. And so it's we're compadres here.
Yeah. And I've got to think we are probably not the only 2 people that had the impulse buy, had such a great experience. Like literally in 30 seconds, I'd never heard of the place. They were throwing meat at me, and I just had to buy a shirt immediately. So we're representing the West Coast. We're representing Fairfax, Virginia. What's not to love? So Art, I know you have seen the questions. So as I said, there's no wrong answers. I'm going to put you on the clock for 14 minutes and 55 seconds. Although, as I always say, I do reserve the right to, I never cut anyone off. So it's more of a suggestion than a formality. But let's get it on.
All right.
Art, the first book that made you want to be a writer, or a book that changed your life?
Yeah, that's, I was thinking about the one that wanted to make me a writer. And when I was little, I used to sit, in a chair that we actually still have, and I would read stacks of mystery stories, The 3 Investigators, Encyclopedia Brown, earlier than that, and Nancy Drew. And I loved those. And it was always like, I want somebody someday to read something of mine the way I am enjoying reading this. So that's it's not really like where it changed my life, but it was like this early fundamental reading experience that continues to inform what we do. We're reading those 3 investigator stories now with our son Dash. He loves them as much as we do.
All right. I mean, I can't even. So that's the first time. We've probably done about 40 of these interviews. That's the first time 3 investigators have come up, but I'm just so happy, like absolutely indelible. 3rd, 4th grade was when I used to go to the Reston bookstore, which still exists.
Yep.
And I would buy what turned out to be original hard copies, from the 60s or whatever. But I devoured the collection, and I still have such a unbelievable happiness and appreciation for Jupiter Jones and his boys. The fact that you're reading that continues in the next generations is amazing. I love it.
He loves them. So yes. And it will continue. I think these things are timeless in so many ways.
The Secret Castle, right, is the first one. I still think that I remember everything about it.
Yep, absolutely. And there's two titles. There's Terror Castle and Secret Castle. There are editions that have each one of them, and the one I have is Terror Castle. But you'll see them both ways.
Amazing. Yep. Amazing. All right, we could have a whole.
I know,
but I'll just say in terms of the shirt. Wow. Okay. All right. Impossible but fun. Who would you say, if you could, your most profound artistic influences?
There's a short story writer in the mystery genre like me that I keep coming back to, who's Stanley Ellen. Great short story writer, wrote a story a year, basically, for many years. You can find his collected works now. And it was a level of craftsmanship and seriousness and darkness, too, in some of the stories that I think really resonates with me. What's funny is I didn't discover him really until after I had already published a number of short stories. So this is an influence that came to me later. Okay. You look back earlier, I remember writing pastiches of, Ernest Hemingway were some of my first stories I did, teaching economy and efficiency. I loved Faulkner, and Mario Vargas Llosa is because of the experimentation that they have. So there's a lot of different influences in different ways, but Stanley Ellen is one now that continues to kind of be the model I aspire toward.
Right on. Okay. Thanks for sharing that. All right. Another impossible one. What's an album or movie or both that you recommend without reservation?
Okay. Now I saw these questions ahead of time, and I have to admit, I like overthunk that phrase "without reservation" because I'm like, you mean recommend it wholeheartedly, or that I would recommend it to anybody out there, which is really hard because there's different audiences. There's but I did come up with one of each, and these are favorites and also influences in one case. Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo, speaking of San Francisco, is a movie that is told so much through images and obsessions, and it's a very simple story in many ways, but it's one that I can watch over and over again, and I love frame by frame every bit of it. And then I listen to jazz music whenever I am writing. I tend to have that on in the background, and John Coltrane's Live at the Village Vanguard is one of my favorites. So yes.
I'm not even going to, I'll suffice it to say Bernard Herrmann's score to Vertigo is maybe the best film score in movie history. But, and yeah, shout out to San Francisco. John Coltrane, when we finally get together for beers, we'll just go deep on jazz and John Coltrane.
We will.
Our long-suffering listeners are like, jazz, and they're reaching for the delete. So we'll move on, but duly noted.
Yep. And Bernard Herrmann, I'm going to say, my Spotify, I've played that soundtrack so much that it now algorithmically keeps giving it back to me, like if I'm random playing. So yes, I agree on that too.
God, what a genius he was. God bless him.
It's great.
All right. What about the best first or last line of any book ever?
Oh, this one was an easy one. It came to me immediately. Flannery O'Connor, Good Man's Hard to Find. I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget it. Get it right, rather. She would have been a good woman if it had been somebody there to shoot her every minute of her life. Immediate. It's great.
Yeah. And that story, I mean, that's probably one of a handful that I have to read at least once a year just to remember how great seeing art at its highest level and both being intimidated but inspired by that.
Yep, absolutely. Yep.
All right, how about an underrated author or someone that you think deserves wider recognition that you'd like to give a shout out to?
It's funny. I try to read, a lot of times what I read is classics. I say classics, things that I'm teaching. And so I come back again and again to a lot of works that are older. But it's always exciting to find writers that I don't know. And I don't know that I would really rate, some of them as underrated as much as unknown to me or unfamiliar to me. There's a couple of writers last year that I read for the first time, short stories that were up for the Edgar Award. I read the finalists every year. Hector Acosta, whose story Turistas was probably one of the finest stories that I read last year. And then Livia Llewellyn, who won the Edgar, it was a tremendously affecting story about two teenage girls. and the name of that was One of These Nights. And and both those were new to me. Maybe there are many people who follow them in different ways, but I'm gonna give a shout out to them.
Right on. Cool. And frankly, I mean, that one question is certainly designed with the intent of broadening exposure, that I haven't gotten the same answer to that twice, which is the entire point. So that's great.
Yeah.
All right. My own self-indulgent obligatory question. Why have you not read Moby Dick? Or if you have, is there a classic that you've been meaning to get around to?
I love Moby Dick. I've read it a couple of times, in fact, once assigned and once not. So it's a big one. The one that there are two actually that I have not been able to get through. One of those is Bleakhouse by Charles Dickens. And I've wanted to read that because of Inspector Bucket, one of the early detective figures. And I've never been able to read into it enough to actually get to Inspector Bucket, unfortunately. I like other Dickens, but it's a big book and it takes a lot, and I just can't do it. The other, I love Crime and Punishment, speaking of classic crime kind of novels, but Brothers Karamazov, you hit the Grand Inquisitor section and I'm just done, so.
Right, that hurts a little bit, but I appreciate it. If you got
Are you a fan of that one?
Huge fan. Maybe in part because I read that I was in college and was maybe young enough and idealistic enough where some of the overwrought prose that was probably poorly translated in the mid-century really affected me. But I think it's definitely speaks to a younger sensibility.
I'll try it again sometime. I love Tolstoy. I know they're very different, there, but I've read War and Peace. I've read Anna Karenina several times. Dostoevsky is another matter.
Right on. All right, we'll revisit that offline.
Over beers.
Okay, getting to you. Would you say that there's a single theme or issue that your work tends to address?
Sure. I'm talking to I'm teaching a short story collections class at Mason right now. I'm talking to my students about how they need to step back and kind of look at their own work to figure out what it is that drives them, what it is that interests them, what passions they're exploring, so they can really be aware of their own aesthetic and style and subject. The thing I realize about mine is that mine are mostly about relationships, but specifically with the idea of what are the expectations and the responsibilities inherent in a relationship, whether a family relationship or a romantic relationship or father son, mother daughter, etc., like that. And what happens when somebody breaks that trust, when there's a betrayal of some kind in stepping away from, falling short of, or literally trying to betray that relationship. That's what I keep coming back to again and again. And it goes in all those directions. So it could be brothers, it could be friends, it's not just romantic. But that's the thing that I keep pursuing and exploring. And what's the guilt? What's the aftermath? What are the consequences? Where does that go?
And Art, I asked your wife the same question. If someone that's watching now isn't sufficiently intrigued or overwhelmed with my bio that I read, what would you recommend as someone that for an entree into the world of Art Taylor? What's a work that you would say this is what you want to start with? Sure.
Well, the new collection out covers 25 years of my short fiction, and so it's got a nice representation there. The collection is called The Boy Detective and the Summer of '74. There's one story in there that I've gotten a lot of feedback on, and it's one that I'm particularly proud of. It's called The Care and Feeding of Houseplants. It appeared in Ellery Queen's Mystery Magazine before, but I'm in an odd way, when I reread the collection myself in proof as I was getting ready, going through all of it, that's the one story that I read and I was like, all right, I can do something right. And that was it. So,
well,
for that one.
Wonderfully modest and self-effacing, but also that's wonderful to have that feeling, right? Because it doesn't happen often, I think, for most artists, where you do feel that sense of just achievement that you're almost kind of in awe of.
I try not to reread stuff that I've written just because all I can see are the flaws. But I had enough distance from this one, and it's got three different points of view. So it's like it weaves through these three different points of view, and I don't know.
Okay.
People like it.
Well, great. Thanks for sharing that. All right. So I usually combine the next two questions just because they are inextricably related, which is the notion of writing routines and writer's block. So I just like to ask writers, do you have an experience with that? Do you have a routine? Have you suffered from writer's block? Does it matter, et cetera? What are your high level thoughts on these two weighty, sometimes pretentious topics?
Oh yeah, not pretentious at all, because I think it's something that people come back to again and again. You know, how do I, as if there's a secret to it. I have friends who write X number of words a day or for X hours a day. I cannot do that. I'm not that kind of person. I have had times when I feel like I can't write at all. One thing that I think helps, and this is something I learned from our son, actually. You know, when he was first learning to walk, he's taken one step and he falls. And then maybe he takes 2 steps and he falls. And then maybe he goes back and takes 1 step. But eventually he got where he was going. And so I think the idea of at least checking in every day helps, whether that is writing a page or whether it's writing a word or whether it's writing a note. But as long as you're staying connected to it, then the rest of the time when you're going about everything else you got to do on the day, it's working in the back of your head. And I think that keeping that connection means that when you do get a chance or do get the impulse to push ahead, you can, because it's all there. So I think that checking in helps. Other than that, yeah, I write at night, I write in the day. There's not a routine, but I think that helps with writer's block. Another thing with writer's block is I think that really is a function of not knowing enough about something. And so I think it always helps to step back, take a walk, step back, make some notes, play, brainstorm, you know, have fun, rather than keep banging your head against a computer screen to get that next sentence down.
Yeah.
So.
I'll just say, in addition to, thank you for sharing that there's clearly no, and I don't think there should be, there really is no secret. There's no one kind of monolithic, you do this and it works. But I think the point is for any and all writers to not be pigeonholed. And there's a lot of different ways to attack these problems. But the key is pen to paper is usually the first step.
I had, I hope I'm not going on too long, but I had a writing professor, Angela Davis Gardner, and she was asked at one point, you know, what do you do if the muse just isn't there? And I expected her, knowing her, to be like, kind of smack that away. But she said, sometimes the muse isn't there. She said, but I try to go to my desk every day so the muse will know where to find me. I thought, all right, there you go.
Yeah, perfect.
Yep.
Perfect. All right, so how about a significant setback, artistic or otherwise, that looking back on may have actually put you on this trajectory that you're currently on?
You know, I don't know if it's fair to say the pandemic here it's been a tough year, and I found many writer friends I know have said that the isolation, the slowdown has actually given them more reason to write. But those tend not to be the folks that are doing day jobs as well, or have kids in school, or those things. And it has been hard to keep momentum a little bit this past year. There are probably other setbacks, other things but that one's fresh in the mind.
Yeah, no, fair. And I think that especially when we look back with some distance, we're going to see that, you know, when you're going through a trauma, especially as a society or as a world, you know, we aren't even really appreciating how deep this has been, because we're just trying to put one foot in front of the other, artistically and otherwise. But yeah, I think we're going to hear a lot more about that when we have some distance. So just have to keep writing. Define or explain what literary success, and I should put that, literary success means to you.
As you had mentioned in the bio, I feel real fortunate that I've had a fair amount of award recognition, and that certainly goes a long way. It feels really nice to have that sort of affirmation from the community. But in other ways, it's really just having somebody read your work and say they liked it. I was at Conversations and Connections, which is a conference that's here in Northern Virginia, and a while after that, I was at Zoe's Kitchen, and this guy comes up to me and goes, "You're Art Taylor. I saw you there. I read your book. It was good." And I was like, I mean, that is success right there in Zoe's Kitchen.
Absolutely. Yeah. And again, as you probably won't be surprised to hear, there's a recurring theme throughout this series. And frankly, when I read writers talking about this stuff, part of it is having, and maybe this takes away some of the weighty potential pretension of trying to talk about art. the writers that live for it, just being able to do it on some level is itself, that tends to take the onus off success and sales and fame and fortune.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, to be able to write, if you really want to write, that's in itself pretty awesome.
Yep, absolutely.
And the rest is, to varying extents, gravy.
Yep. But
gravy's good. You need gravy.
Yeah.
So is there something, Art, that you wish you had known as a writer 10 or even 20 years ago?
Sticking with it, having faith that if you stick with it, that things will work out. I mean, there's no guarantees, obviously, but I feel like I keep telling my students, there will come a point where you will get published. There will come a point where if you just keep at it long enough, and maybe not idealistic, but that's what I wish I'd told myself, because there were many times when I felt like this is never going to work out.
Yep. And Tara mentioned it earlier. And again, this, I would say, there's probably, because I think like most writers and readers, I obsessively over the decades have read everything I can about writers talking about craft. But I think the one word that comes up most often is perseverance. And those that stop, and maybe some should stop, many shouldn't. But just about every writer, whether it's Stephen King or, a lesser known writer, talks about people in their workshops that were much more talented than them that stopped. And part of the secret of their success was just kept going.
Yep.
There's a whole mystery and kind of philosophy just involved in that. But I think
absolutely
on a basic level, you do kind of have to love it, even when it's difficult. Otherwise,
yes. Yep.
All right. So in closing, and this is particularly relevant as a writing teacher, for a beginning writer that's looking for advice with a 1 or 2 minute exhortation. You kind of covered it already in terms of perseverance, but someone came to you in a restaurant and said, how do I begin?
Yeah, I mean, stick with it is the one thing. You follow these cliches like slow and steady wins the race. But I think that's true. One thing I see is that I see some writers that are so intent on publication that they don't focus on the craft first. And I really think once you get the craft down, the publication will follow more easily than if you're just trying to write something quickly and get something out. And so take the time to develop that craft, and don't necessarily look for the overnight success, and know that the slow and steady, as I said, is going to get you there.
That's wonderful. And Art, I think actually it's very relevant, particularly in 2021. I mean, I think we are increasingly in a kind of instant gratification age, and that can have, negative impact on the craft of writing, because heaven forbid you do get some early success. That can become a weird kind of addiction where the work that lasts, right, has been lovingly crafted and will stand the test of time. So that really resonates, and I hope younger writers watching this really take that to heart, because he knows of what he speaks. Art, we could go on all day, but we'll save this for when we finally lift some pints in Fairfax. But thank you for sharing your experience and your wisdom, but also it's so inspiring to me whenever I talk to a writer who obviously loves the craft and has dedicated their life to it. It can't help but rub off in very positive ways. So I thank you and your wife for giving me, and I'm certain everyone watching this, a real dose of inspiration for how to do it the right way.
Well, thanks for having us on. This was a lot of fun, and look forward to meeting in person and getting together in person later on.
Well, and I always ask about Moby Dick, and I tend to end these by saying, for better or worse, I consider 1455 like the mafia. Once I get you in, you're never getting out. So this will not be our first pas de deux. So to be continued.
Sounds good. Thanks so much.
See you soon. Thanks for tuning in, folks.